The office party was in full swing when Brielle finally remembered I existed. I'd been standing by the appetizer table for 20 minutes, watching her work the room at Morrison Digital Marketing with practiced ease. "Oh, there you are," she said, appearing at my side with a wine glass and that fake smile she reserved for social obligations. "Everyone, I want you to meet someone." Her co-workers turned toward us with polite interest. "This is my mother-in-law, Patricia," Brielle announced with theatrical flair. "Also known as the family burden." The group's laughter was uncomfortable. A few people shifted awkwardly, glancing between us with obvious discomfort. "Brielle," one colleague said quietly, "that's not very nice." "Oh, don't worry about Patricia," Brielle waved dismissively. "She knows I'm kidding. Ever since my father-in-law died, she's been needing a lot of help adjusting to life on her own." I smiled serenely, the way I'd learned to do over 2 years of enduring Brielle's casual cruelty. "I'm managing just fine, dear." "Sure you are," Brielle said with a patronizing laugh. "That's why Danny has to drive you everywhere and help with your bills. That's why you're living in that tiny apartment." More uncomfortable silence from her colleagues. I could see several people reconsidering their opinion of Brielle. "Actually," I said pleasantly, "I'd love to meet your boss. Danny mentioned you work for such an innovative company." Brielle's expression flickered with annoyance. "Mr. Morrison is probably busy. This is really more of an employee event." "Oh, I don't mind waiting," I insisted. A kind colleague named Sarah pointed toward a distinguished man near the bar. "That's Mr. Morrison over there." Before Brielle could object, I was walking toward him. "Excuse me," I said, approaching him. "Are you Mr. Morrison? I'm Patricia Walsh, and I believe we have mutual business interests." David Morrison's professional smile immediately transformed into shock. "Patricia? What are you doing here?" "I'm attending the party with my daughter-in-law. She works for your company." "Your daughter-in-law works here?" David's eyes widened. "Which one is she?" I gestured toward Brielle, who had gone pale. "Brielle Stevenson. Marketing department." David's professional mask slipped. "Brielle Stevenson is your daughter-in-law." "That's right. She was just telling her colleagues what a burden I am to the family. I thought it appropriate to introduce myself to her employer." The color had completely drained from Brielle's face. She knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. "Patricia," David said carefully, "would you like to step into my office? I think we should talk privately." "Excellent idea." As we walked toward the executive offices, I could hear Brielle frantically trying to explain to her colleagues how she knew I was connected to their boss. David's office was impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows, awards covering the walls, photos of successful campaigns. What caught my attention was the small framed photo on his desk from the company's 10th anniversary celebration. "Patricia, does Brielle know about our business relationship?" "Apparently not," I said, settling into a leather chair. "She introduced me as the family burden to her colleagues. I thought it might be time for clarity about exactly who I am." David winced. "She actually called you that? In front of employees?" "Those were her exact words. Along with comments about how my son has to drive me everywhere because I can't manage on my own." Morrison Digital Marketing had been struggling when I first invested 3 years ago. David had built a solid foundation but needed capital to expand. My investment firm had provided the funding, taking a 60% stake in exchange for growth money. I'd insisted on remaining a silent partner, wanting David to maintain operational control of the company he'd built. My role was purely financial, providing capital and strategic advice when requested. "How much does she know about your situation?" David asked diplomatically. "She knows my husband died 2 years ago. She knows I downsized to a smaller apartment. She assumes that means I'm struggling financially." "And your son?" "Believes the same thing. When I downsized, I told them I wanted to simplify my life. I never mentioned investing the proceeds." David nodded slowly. "So they think you're living on a fixed income. They think I'm a burden who needs their help and charity. Brielle has made that very clear." "What do you want me to do about tonight?" "I want you to correct her misconceptions. All of them." David pressed the intercom. "Sandra, could you ask Brielle Stevenson to come to my office? Tell her it's regarding the Walsh account." Brielle knocked 3 minutes later, her face professionally composed but barely concealing panic. You wanted to see me, Mr. Morrison? Come in, Brielle. Close the door. She stood stiffly in front of David's desk, avoiding eye contact with me. Brielle, I understand you've been having interesting conversations about Mrs. Walsh here. We were just chatting at the party. Nothing important. You introduced her as the family burden, I believe. Brielle's face flushed red. That was just joking. She knows I don't mean anything by it. I see. And you mentioned that she needs help with bills and transportation because she can't manage on her own. Well, she's getting older, and since my father-in-law died. Brielle, David interrupted, Mrs. Walsh isn't just your mother-in-law. She's also the majority owner of this company. The words hung in the air like smoke. Brielle's mouth opened and closed several times. That's impossible. Walsh Investment Group owns 60% of Morrison Digital Marketing, David continued methodically. Patricia Walsh is the principal. She has been our primary investor and silent partner for 3 years. Brielle looked at me with dawning horror. You own the company? The majority of it, yes. But you live in that tiny apartment. You don't have a car. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment because I don't need more space. I don't own a car because I prefer not to drive in city traffic. And I enjoy spending time with my son. But the bills. Danny said you needed help. Danny offered to help, and I let him because it made him feel good. I never said I needed it. David pulled out a folder. Brielle, Walsh Investment Group's annual return from this company alone exceeds your yearly salary. Mrs. Walsh's total portfolio is substantial. Brielle sank into the remaining chair, white with shock. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling? Because I wanted to see who you really were, I said simply. I wanted to know if my son had married someone who would care about me as a person, or someone who would only respect me for my money. But I do care about you. Do you? Because calling me the family burden suggests otherwise. That was just. I was trying to be entertaining. So you chose to entertain them by humiliating your husband's mother. David cleared his throat. Brielle, Mrs. Walsh could have revealed her identity at any time. She chose not to maintain the company's independence. That discretion is why our partnership has been successful. What does this mean for my job? Brielle whispered. David looked at me, deferring to my judgment. I studied Brielle's face, seeing real fear. It means you have a choice. You can learn from this and become someone who treats others with respect regardless of what you think they can do for you. Or you can continue mocking elderly family members for entertainment. I choose the first option, she said quickly. Good. Then go back to that party and apologize to every colleague who heard you call me the family burden. Explain that you were wrong about my situation and that you're sorry for speaking disrespectfully. Right now. Right now. After Brielle left, David and I sat in comfortable silence. You know, he said finally, I've been wondering for 3 years what kind of person chooses to remain a silent partner when they could be taking credit for our success. And now you know. I rejoined the party to find Brielle making awkward apologies to her colleagues, explaining that she'd been mistaken about my financial situation and that her earlier comments had been inappropriate. Mrs. Walsh is actually a very successful businesswoman, she was saying. I should never have spoken about her that way. Danny arrived to pick me up around 9, scanning the room in confusion. His wife was behaving strangely, hovering around me protectively instead of networking, speaking to me with uncharacteristic deference. Everything okay? He asked as we drove home. Brielle seems different. She learned some new information about my business activities. What kind of business activities? I smiled at my son, this good man who genuinely thought he was helping his struggling mother. The kind that might surprise you. We should have lunch this week and discuss my financial situation. I think it's time for honesty in this family. The conversation with Danny came 3 days later. I explained about Walsh Investment Group, about the portfolio I'd built over 20 years, about the deliberate choice to downsize my lifestyle while growing my wealth. You're rich, he asked, processing the information. I'm financially secure enough that your wife's employer depends on my investment to stay in business. You own 60% of Morrison Digital Marketing. Danny's face went through the same emotions: shock, confusion, understanding. That's why she's been acting weird since the party. That's why. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to know who you both really were. And Danny, you passed the test. You offered help because you love me, not because you thought I had money to leave you. And Brielle. Brielle called me the family burden. I think that speaks for itself. Danny was quiet, processing everything. What happens now? Now we build an honest relationship. No more pretending I need help I don't need. No more letting people treat me poorly because they think I'm powerless. 6 months later, Brielle and Danny's marriage was stronger than ever. The shock of learning about my true situation had forced them to examine their assumptions and their treatment of me. Brielle never again spoke disrespectfully, partly from genuine remorse, but mostly from knowledge that I had power to affect her career. The best part was watching my son realize that his mother was still the same strong, intelligent woman who had raised him. She just happened to have a bank account that reflected 40 years of smart financial decisions. Sometimes the best revenge is simply revealing who you've always been.